There are hundreds of videos that haven't been launched on YouTube on Patreon. Make sure you guys join the Patreon to help us grow. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert. We're going back into early history of Mormonism and the insanity of Joseph Smith's life, the growing of this cult, this polygamous cult that's into some, I guess you say, strange things for these times, especially in America. There's a growing number of people who are becoming violent in this cult, and someone might be president very soon. With that being said, let me bring our guest on. I have Bryce Blankenagel, the host of Naked Mormonism podcast. He is naked, in case you're wondering. Thank you for joining us, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing me back.
And we have David Fitzgerald. David Fitzgerald's been around. He's came on. He's got a couple different books, Nailed, all the good stuff. But The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, Book 1, The Mormons, is the one you definitely want to get your hands on pertaining to this topic. I would ask that all of you go down in the description of this video before we get started. Help these guys out. Become a Patreon. Is it still free to join your Patreon, Bryce?
It is still free until I reboot the podcast, and that's going to come once I have a working manuscript of the book.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, go show them some love. You can join for very little coffee. It's like a coffee a month once it actually kicks in for both of these guys. And Dave has one as well. He's trying to grow one. He is kind of the Flintstones. He's kind of stuck in the past, but if it weren't for his loved one, the wonderful wife that he has, the techie, he probably wouldn't have a Patreon either, but you guys could help him out. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to be different. This is a new platform, of course, set up for what we're doing on the show. I'm going to be able to listen to you guys now that Dave's internet is up to speed, and I can't wait to where we go. So please take us off.
We took a little break from our recording schedule for holidays and for January. So we may cover some ground that has already been covered, or we may skip some things that are necessary context information. So hopefully the viewers are willing to bear with us for a bit. Last I recall us talking about was the Council of 50 being started up. Joseph Smith establishing his theocratic government that would replace the American government once he was able to overthrow the government or to be elected president. There's a lot of underlying political machinations that are going on, and there's also a lot of dissent from within the church, within Nauvoo, that Joseph Smith and his cronies are trying to deal with and trying to keep a lid on, such that they can still keep the community under their control.
And so in a nutshell, we're in about 1844, the last half year really of Joseph Smith's life, and things are reaching the boiling point where it's just spinning and spinning and spinning out of control. And there's no putting the brakes on at this point. There's no stopping it. It's just what's going to happen is going to happen.
I do want to point out that it's very clear that the leadership understood that polygamy was going to be one of the wedge issues in the community once the evidence of it was so preponderant that they could no longer deny that it was going on. They knew that was going to cause a lot of fracturing within the community, in addition to a lot of scrutiny from the outside. So there were disagreements about how to proceed forward with continuing to practice polygamy and continuing to expand it among the most insular groups.
Right. And the leadership was just as divided as the outer group was.
Absolutely.
Those who were even aware that that was a real thing, because all this time it's been publicly and privately and from the pulpit denied that it's not a thing. But so everybody knows it is.
So Let me get this straight. This guy is dealing with internal affairs, external affairs that are dealing with polygamy, as well as owing people money. He still has the Missouri Mormon War that took place constantly haunting him. He's got Porter Rockwell recently escaping prison and surviving somehow and making it home looking like a caveman. He's now in charge of the bar, which is, I don't know if you'd have a guy like that in charge of your alcohol. And then he has a secret place, you said, that's being built under the staircase for his little private one-on-one session with his spirit wives and whatnot.
Yeah, when you said his internal affairs is exactly the right word to be using in this context.
Certainly. Yeah.
Oh, and he's running for president at this moment too.
That's true. And there's even disagreements about who is, his vice president, who his running mate's going to be, because he sought a couple of high profile people to be his running mates. He was rejected by a few of them, and then one of them he sent and figured out that person was actually born in Ireland, so therefore not eligible to be vice president, and he retracted the offer only to later find out that the person was actually an American citizen and he didn't need to retract it. It's a huge mess. It's a chaotic mess. And the thing is it's I don't know. I feel like a lot of us have become familiar with outrage fatigue and the constant overbearing feeling that you get from watching scandal after scandal take place and not having any ability to stop it or control it or do anything about it or hold anybody accountable. Well, there are certain people who benefit from creating that scandal and that outrage fatigue. And if you're able to cultivate that and keep that at just a rolling boil for long enough, then when you hit the population with something really crazy, like we're going to take over the country, they're much more receptive to it. They're less resilient. You have worn the people down. You are a rough stone rolling forth and rounding off the edges, right? And it's, that's a Joseph Smith quote, rough stone rolling. So trying to get the people conditioned to become soldiers, to become people who would give anything and everything to the church, takes a long time and it takes a lot of process. And in order to wear them down, they keep this outrage machine of building power, building steam. And anytime that they are called to scrutiny, or anytime somebody stands up and says, hey, something's wrong here, they're an enemy of the gospel, right? They are an adversary. They need to be put out of the way. So that has a way of hyper radicalizing the followers, and getting them very, very much on the inside and willing to do anything that Joseph Smith wants. Big problem with it, though, is Joseph Smith, he was a bad businessman. He was really bad at business, and you need to be a good businessman if you're going to attempt to overthrow the country. So the people who work with him, who are good businessmen in the quorum of apostles, they're not quite as radical as Joseph Smith. They're smarter.
You're talking about 18 something, right? You're not talking about 2020, are you?
No.
Weird, right? Weird.
Everything goes around comes around, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
but these people are Joe's handlers, right? And you have Brigham Young, you have William Wines Phelps, you have William Clayton. You have these guys who are on the polygamy in group, who are super into it, who are trying to keep Joseph Smith controlled and contained until the time is right. But Joseph Smith himself is a very radical revolutionary. He wants to implement his plans without knowing all of the constituent pieces that go into the plans. So there's this tension that's building even among Joseph Smith and his trusted acolytes of what the next step is, how to go about this. And then Joe just kind of declares, I'm running for president and I'm going to establish the government, the Council of 50. And then it's like any plans that they had, it's like, all right, well, now we have to change everything because that's the new plan because Joe said so.
Yeah. And it's a new country, so it doesn't sound quite as crazy back then as it would now. I mean, everything is kind of still up for grabs. Like you said, state governors are pretty much running their own fiefdoms at this point. So it's not inconceivable that the Nauvoo militia could become, United States of Mormonism.
Right. It's also notable that there weren't any federal militias, right? So in order for the federal government to raise militias, they need to petition states' governors, who would then raise up militias from their various states, who would then basically elect a commander who would oversee those various militia divisions. So there isn't, if a rebel army is able to gather enough steam and enough force behind it, it's up to the state's governors to quell that rebellion. Well, at this time, Joseph Smith's army, his personal army, the Nauvoo Legion, is bigger than the state militia of Illinois, bigger than the militia of Illinois and Missouri combined. He's a true threat, right? This is a serious, dangerous threat. But, like you said, David, like this is Western expansion. Everything is up for grabs right now. And there are disagreements going on in politics right now about the way that American expansionism is going to run, right? I mean, the Battle of the Alamo was back in 1836. That was not even 10 years before this. The question of like what to do with Texas, the Republic of Texas. We still haven't had the Mexican-American War yet. Oregon territory and expansion into Canada, what California looks like and how big California is. Like there are some really big questions that the politicians of the country are facing in 1844. And in all of this, Joe has some of his boys planted in Washington, D.C., working with the politicians there, and they're relaying information back and forth to Joseph Smith and his boys back in Nauvoo. And one of these people was Stephen A. Douglas, the same Stephen A. Douglas who was the running opponent to Abraham Lincoln. Stephen A. Douglas was a friend of the Mormons, very, very good friend of the Mormons. He had done all sorts of favors for them as a circuit judge before he was elected to Congress. And once he was in Congress, he was very friendly to the Mormons. What he was able to do was he got a copy of John C. Fremont's excursion notes and the maps that Fremont drew, which were an extremely rare commodity at this time. And they were only in the Library of Congress because it was a government-funded expedition to map out the western half of the nation, everything west of the Mississippi. John Fremont, these Fremont maps were basically smuggled to the Mormons with the help of Stephen A. Douglas, who took them from the Library of Congress.
Wow.
And these were all sent back to Nauvoo, which was then allowed the Mormon leadership there to plan out their Western expansion. Because the grand plan was Nauvoo would be the hub for true Western expansion. It would be the headquarters that would launch European settlement all the way to the West Coast.
It's wild to me to think that they had enough political power that we could have had a civil war 20 years earlier between the Mormons and the American forces.
And that's an important point too. The Nauvoo and what Joe was doing in Nauvoo was about 20 years ahead of its time. And that's with these massive political forces, with Civil War and the disagreements about slavery and Western expansion. But in addition to that, industrialization. Nauvoo was just barely too early to reap the benefits of industrialization. Now, Chicago at this time was beginning to industrialize, right? So there was a railroad that was connected into Chicago in, I think, 1842 or 43. I read it a long time ago. I'm trying to remember from a while back. But it was very early on, and that caused Chicago to rapidly grow and rapidly expand. Well, Nauvoo in 1844 is more than twice the size of Chicago.
Think about that. Wow.
So if Nauvoo was able to industrialize the way that Chicago industrialized, Nauvoo would be Chicago today. But because the Mormons were just a little bit ahead of the schedule, a little ahead of industrialization, they weren't able to build the factories and to build the manufacturing districts and to build everything to actually become another Chicago.
And something occurs to me just now, too. In a way, Mormonism did benefit from industrialization because all the people who were kicked out from industrialization in Britain, in America, they flocked to Mormonism because they actively recruited from them. But so they had this peasant population, because Joseph Smith, the Mormon leadership was constantly preying on their own people. And there was not enough leaders with good business sense like William Law and all the rest because they were too busy, being parasites to their flock.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to add into more of the factors that's also making Mormonism very dangerous, there's in many ways, the entire economy is based on debt. But the Mormons, in many ways, are self-sufficient. They have enough crops in the lands outlying Nauvoo to sustain themselves. And if that doesn't work, then they can raid and pillage the local towns because the Mormon settlements outnumber the non-Mormon settlements.
And they're not above it. They're not above it.
They've done it before. Why not again, right? So that all happened in Missouri. Well, let's make it, Illinois, Missouri again, right? So in addition to this, right, like my shotgun is a Browning shotgun, right? Well, that Browning, Jonathan Browning, his dad got his start in Nauvoo. So John Browning Sr., I believe it is, had a gun shop in Nauvoo, and I want one so bad. These early Browning guns, some of these early Browning guns have a metal plaque on them that says "Holiness to the Lord," which is a Mormon phrase that's inscribed on all the temples. I want one of those guns so bad. I want one so bad. They're extremely rare, extremely collectible, but they're really great. But those are some of the Browning's earliest guns. Yeah. Is those "Holiness to the Lord" and Nauvoo Legion guns. So they have their own gunsmith. They have enough of their own crops. They have, their own like little small manufacturing districts. They have a lot of things to build truly a magnificent and prosperous city. They just need the time for all of these early efforts to actually gain a foothold and to actually flourish. They didn't have enough time. That's why Nauvoo is a city that nobody knows about today. If they were allowed more time, if the Battle of Nauvoo had never happened, then
those ifs,
all the ifs, right? The Mormons never would have settled Utah, and who knows what American history would look like, right? So much hinges on this time.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I can't even imagine just the idea of monogamy, what that would look like in America. Like. Just that alone, like just the idea.
Polygamy. You mean polygamy?
No, that's what I mean. Like the minority view might end up being monogamy. You know what I mean? Like, how many guys would be having 2 and 3 wives? I mean, I don't. You know what I'm saying? There's just no telling.
Yeah.
But they had religious. I'm glad there's a secular slant today, whereas it's the religious stuff. I mean, we see how that works in some of these FLDS cults and stuff. Not pretty.
Very scary.
Yeah.
By far, the scariest parts I talk about in my book on the Mormons is the stuff that's happening right now today in places like Arizona and southern Utah. Yeah.
Mm. And I also want to point out that there's also very much the popular view that it's like, polygamy is like a dangerous cult and Warren Jeffs is a horrible person, so on and so forth. That's also it's painted to us that that's kind of like the majority of these interactions are that most of these patriarchs are just like Warren Jeffs with 50 wives and they're evil and they're monsters, and that's just not the case.
And they are. But most almost are not like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like almost all polygamous marriages. Like I have a number of friends who are like Mormon polygamists, right? Like most of the marriages are really not that different than like my marriage to my partner. They're not that different. It's just their normal. It looks a little bit different than our normal, and that's just fine. But it does cultivate people like a Warren Jeffs or like a Joseph Smith being tyrants.
This is the thing. And for what it's worth, all those soccer moms in Provo who have their sister wives. Fair play. If it works for you, I'm all for it. That's awesome.
I'm considering joining the cult. I'm just.
Good luck.
But on the flip side, the Taliban level of those, Jeff, FLDS, that's some scary ass stuff going on.
Yeah. And it's also interesting too because Jeff's and I've seen this firsthand, right? Like Jeff's is locked up right now, and he has a contingent of people who are following him. But in the Twin Cities, Colorado City, Arizona, and Short Creek, the area is Short Creek, whatever, Hilldale, Utah. That's the other town. There's a power vacuum there. It's not good. There is a power vacuum there that will suck somebody up into it.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's important to recognize how similar that is to Nauvoo in 1844 after the assassination of Joseph and Hiram Smith, right? The power vacuum was there and it required people to step up into the power vacuum. And that is very much the same thing is going on in Short Creek right now.
And I can't wait for us to get to that because the things that the people that stepped up to become the next Joseph Smith, that kills me. That
it's
whole
wild.
chapter of Mormonism.
It's wild.
So let me recap. I was going to recap real quick to give people that are watching the refreshment of what we have. We have Joseph Smith's running. They're trying to arrest him. They do arrest him. they're met with potential force and they're arrested. The arrestees are arrested and they're down here going, hey, man, well, look, no, you're going to join us for dinner there, buddy. And they end up pretty much getting the threat, like, back off, like you're not going to have any say over us here in Nauvoo. They wrote their own laws protecting themselves, and some idiot from above just signed off and didn't realize what they did till probably it's too late. And they're not allowed to arrest him in Nauvoo. He pretty much wrote another law of his own to protect him. These guys are somewhere running off trying to get support to get this guy taken down because they know he's no joke. And in that picture that you showed us with him with his sword, holding his sword out, and they're in the crowds on their horses, probably with some dirty underwear. They shit their pants, okay, if you're wondering what that means.
I would too.
I know. And there's a whole legion of ready to die or kill in the name of the Lord right here. That's coming. And you just cannot get that out of your head. So just be ready. He's in God mode though right now. That's literally what he's in. He's in God mode. Nobody can touch him.
In the cheat codes.
Yep.
So let's once again reiterate the fracture divide. We have the pro-polygamy movement is Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, William Clayton, Heber Kimball, and the guys who have ended up all going out to Utah. The anti-polygamist movement within the church leadership are primarily led by the Fosters, the Higbees, and the Laws.
All guys who Joseph Smith tried to steal their wives from, incidentally.
More than likely, yes, at least on some of them. Also with the Higbee brothers, they suspected that Joe had their dad murdered, right? Like these guys didn't like Joe for a couple of years, right? And then the Fosters, like not Robert. So there's Robert Foster, and then I can't remember his brother. Robert Foster's brother pulled a pistol on Joseph Smith in broad daylight, tried to shoot him. And Porter Rockwell knocked the pistol out of the guy's hand. So like these guys are ready to kill him. They are confronting him on the street when he's confronting them. And the tension is growing among these groups. I was just going to say, I was just reading a story about Robert Foster coming home from one of his missionary journeys, comes home, and there's the prophet having dinner with his wife. And yes,
and it's like, oh, what's this all about?
I'm gonna beat your ass.
He pulls a gun and says, all right, what's going on? And tell me. And she's not saying anything. He gives her a gun and says, either you shoot or I'm going to shoot. And it's like, whoa. And it's like, yeah, he was giving me the whole spiritual wife talk. And, So these are the kinds of stories that are going on behind the scenes all the time at this point. Yeah.
Isn't the Law brothers now the Brutus or Judas prophecy? There's like a prophecy going around saying you will be the ones who will betray him or something.
That's
like that.
right. Yeah. So in my podcast, I called him William Brutus Marx and William Judas Law, because there's William Marx and William Law, and these guys are the Judas and Brutus that Joseph Smith doesn't name, but he alludes to, and everybody's like, oh, who's the Judas? Who's going to betray the prophet? So the people are hyped up and they're on edge looking for who the traitor is, who's going to get the prophet killed, right? Who's going to betray him, kiss him on the cheek. So that, the population of Mormons also is becoming kind of hostile to these guys as well, because Joe is sometimes naming them, but he's also holding court councils against these guys, high council, disciplinary councils against them. And they're emerging as public figures who are antagonistic, but who believe in the church, right? Who are very much into the Book of Mormon and into the gospel and into everything that Joe says. They just think that Joe is a problem.
Exactly. That's an important distinction to make. They don't think he's a false prophet. They think he's a fallen prophet. Yes, he's a real prophet, but he's backsliding. He's not doing what the Lord wants, but he's the real deal. They still, even despite everything that's happening, they still, his financial shadery, his affairs, his trying to steal their very own wives, they still think he's a prophet. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. It just shows you psychologically. That's it. I don't want to go. I don't even want to go. I just want to say, just think about that for a second. Just think about that. And it's still alive and well today, of course. So,
but by the same token, it's getting to the point where even though even with that in mind, they are still opposing him. And like the trials that Bryce is alluding to, like for the Fosters, Joseph Smith is getting ready to put them on trial for apostasy, whatnot. And then he finds out, oh, they're gathering their witnesses and they're going to turn it into an indictment of him. So it becomes a secret trial then.
Yes.
You know? So
yes,
it's like
exactly.
things are really neck and neck right now between.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's very, very unstable right now.
And Joe is also manipulating the markets because these guys, all of them own property and own businesses. Wilson Law, notably, basically owned the wharf where ships would dock, offload and load passengers and cargo, and they would have to obviously, pay him the docking fees. So that was money that he was taking in that Joe obviously wanted. But what Joe did to try and ice these guys out is basically told all the Mormons that you don't do any business with the Laws or the Fosters or the Higbees. And that forces them to, well, okay, so there's a private communication between William and Wilson, these brothers. William says that we need to get out. We need to form an exit strategy. This was right after Joe had tried to have his Danites murder William Law. And he said, we need to sell our property. We need to get rid of our property and get out of Nauvoo. It's too dangerous. But Joe commanded that nobody is to transact any business with these guys. So he was able to freeze all of their assets and they weren't able to cash out and leave town and do anything. So that in many ways, that's one of the primary factors that caused them to purchase a printing press and have it shipped into town. And it was brought into town. I think it's in Joe's journal. He has William Clayton write this for him, that an apostate press arrived in Nauvoo. And I think it was on May 6th, 1844. And this printing press went to a shop that was owned by William Law. And from this brand new printing press, they published the front piece for the Nauvoo Expositor, which was basically an announcement that, hey, in a month, we're going to publish the first of our weekly periodicals. It's going to be called the Nauvoo Expositor. And in it, I have a quote pulled from this, right?
Okay.
It says, "We are earnestly seeking to explode the vicious principles of Joseph Smith and those who practice the same abominations and whoredoms, which we verily know are not accordant and consonant with the principles of Jesus Christ and the apostles. And for that purpose, and with that end in view, with an eye single to the glory of God, we have dared to gird on the armor, and with God at our head, we most solemnly and sincerely declare that the sword of truth shall not depart from the thigh, nor the buckler from the arm, until we can enjoy these glorious privileges which nature's God and our country's laws have guaranteed to us: freedom of speech, the liberty of the press, and the right to worship God as seemeth us good." And then it goes on to talk. Yeah, and then it goes on to talk about how we know that we're in danger and we're really stupid for doing this, but we're going to do it anyway.
And part of their exit strategy by this point is we're going to start our own splinter church, our Reformed Latter-day Saints church.
Called the True Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
You know what's so funny about this is they'll probably have kids that'll, but I'm just giving you an example. They probably won't. I want to see the history, but this is how things would work. They're going to have kids. The kid's going to hate their dad. They're going to break off. Well, we're going to have the real true church, and it just never ends, man.
You're not wrong. Just guess how many Latter-day Saints splinter groups that we know of today.
You want me to guess?
Yeah, just rough guess. I mean, you got the church, you've got the fundamentalist church, you've got the Reformed ones.
I'll say like maybe 20. I don't know, maybe high, I guess.
Multiply that by 10 and you're in the ballpark. There are about 200 splinter groups that we know of.
Dang.
That we know of. Yeah.
The guy, Stephen Shields, who wrote that, that's what is it? It's not Scattering the Saints. Well, wait, maybe that was it, where he made that estimation of 200. He gave a presentation at Sunstone a couple of years ago discussing the schism crisis. And he said, well, I need to update my book because by my estimations now it's closer to 400. Yeah, and it's like these things crop up all over the place, right? And especially in the fundamentalist groups who may or may not practice polygamy, one person will have a disagreement with the prophet, and then they'll break off and start their own, and it's not very often documented. Very little of it ever like reaches the surface.
And what's part of the problem with tracking this is that some of these groups are no bigger than a single family. Sure. And some of them are no better than a criminal gang, and they don't always like each other, and it gets ugly even today. Yeah, at least the latest, the 80s and 90s. I'm sure it hasn't changed now since. Yeah.
Well, yeah. you stirred the hornet's nest. So now what? I want to know.
Are you listening? This stuff writes itself.
Yeah, what's going to happen to these guys? I mean, obviously they did some no-no.
Well, William Law puts himself as the leader of this new church, of this true Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? And what he does is he sets out the tenets of his new religion. And basically his new religion is, we believe in everything that Joseph Smith says, except for polygamy. And better yet, if you want to join our church, we're going to honor your priesthood certificates from Joseph's church, and you will still have our priesthood when you come to our church. So they basically created a membership transfer program from Joseph's church to this church. And a part of this was calling out the grievances that Joseph Smith has caused people. And in their circular, in their teaser, in their pamphlet for the Nauvoo Expositor, they even petitioned the people, asking for them to tell their stories, to give them the evidence of the villainy of Joseph Smith, so that they can make a proper exposure of this and call him to repentance. That's really what the impetus behind this was, is calling him to repentance, to get him away from the state of being a fallen prophet to once again being a repented and true prophet.
Yeah.
While using this literature that is fabricated by Joseph Smith and those, I'm going to use the term in this context, and those polygamists, because technically the initial men are really the ones who jumped on board with this polygamy idea, except for maybe a couple. But if I'm not mistaken, most of the ones that are pro polygamy have been there from day one, right?
Well, the funny thing about that is, and this is something I didn't realize until Bryce had brought it up earlier in the series here, Emma Smith, who I've always lumped firmly in the anti-polygamist camp, at one point she was saying, well, if you're going to take this woman as my wife, I'm going to take William Law as my husband. How's that? It's like, so it's a lot more nuanced than I had realized, or come to appreciate. Yeah.
And I'll also point this out from the actual expositor itself, and I'm going to screen share really quick so people can see just a little visual stimulation that's more than just our faces talking. But here is William Law. This is a very iconic chin strap beard, and this guy is a hero among ex-Mormon groups, because it's like this guy stuck to his laurels. He fought against the prophet when it was very likely that it was life-threatening to do so. The prophet iced him out of all of his property, and he just got screwed over and publicly assailed by Joseph Smith. And this guy is a bit of a hero in Mormon or ex-Mormon circles. But this is a copy. I mean, this is just a like an updated version of it. But here's an actual screen, a scanned version of the Nauvoo Expositor that you can see yourself. Is it's a real paper. This thing is really an iconic moment in Mormon history. And in this, let me stop sharing. I want to read a little quote from this, because it does talk about them trying to go through the proper channels to reform the church and not being successful. They say, quote, "Many of us have sought a reformation in the church without a public exposition of the enormities of crimes practiced by its leaders, thinking that if they would hearken to counsel and chew fruit meet for repentance, it would be as acceptable with God as though they were exposed to public gaze." And it goes on to say that wasn't successful. So here we are exposing these things. And there are multiple parts to this. They did not like how polygamy was going, right? Close friends of William and Jane Law were the Lawrence sisters, who were both taken to wife by Joseph Smith and raped, and one of them even ended up succumbing to her PTSD a few years later, and committing suicide. Right, like these girls suffered horrible shit, and then Joe stole thousands of dollars from them because they were orphans and they had an inheritance, and he just straight up stole it from them. And the laws saw what happened. They saw the real world impact of what is going on. And the expositor talks extensively and describes the PTSD that these young teenage girls, teenage women suffered from these relationships, from these marriages. And it's a harrowing read. The whole thing, you can read through it in, 25, 30 minutes or whatever. I would highly recommend it. Just Google Nauvoo Expositor. You can find it on Archive or on, any website that talks about Mormonism. But it does extensively discuss the details of how troubling and how problematic polygamy truly was, but also the political machinations.
Yeah.
They were not happy with Joseph Smith being so damn powerful.
Yeah. And what a miracle that survives at all, because I don't want to give any spoilers, but Nauvoo Expositor was not in print for very long.
well, let's get into that, right? Like, that's where we are. That's where the story is.
Yeah.
Joe didn't know what to do with the Nauvoo Expositor, right? And he resorted to the same tactics that had been used against his people in Missouri. And he said the news, it's a nuisance. It's a public nuisance that we have to destroy the printing press.
Yeah.
Dude, this guy, man.
One issue, done.
One issue. Yep, it got out one issue.
So there was nothing he couldn't undo the damage from this expositor releasing this print. Go ahead.
I was going to say they in the city council, the Council of 50 met and deliberated about what to do with the council or with the Nauvoo Expositor. And in one of the notes written by William Clayton, he says that they have the second number of the Nauvoo Expositor, as if they had the second one that was going to come out, and that they agreed to destroy it after reading the contents of the second number.
You mean the first? After the second.
Yeah, so like the first number was published June 7th, I believe, right? And they deliberated for basically 3 days straight in the city council about how to do this, what to do with this, how to legally destroy this printing press. And one of the notes from William Clayton says that Joseph read from the second number of the Nauvoo Expositor, which leads me personally to believe, I haven't seen any historian talk about this, but it leads me personally to believe that they had the second number ready to go, and that they were in the process of printing the second number. And the first number was damaging enough, they couldn't let the second one get out, so they had to destroy it before the second one was finished.
That second one had survived to reach the public, that would have been awesome.
They probably even nailed the coffin harder on the second one, saying, you know what? We already are in big trouble here. Let's go ahead and pull everything we have on them out. And I can't imagine. So that leads me to ask the question, what the hell happened to this printing press and the people that are behind it?
Let's not forget that there's still a whole state that thinks they're traitors and wants to kill them. Now they've destroyed a printing press, the free press. They are threatening free press. People go ballistic outside of Nauvoo over this.
Right.
Like, you've just committed treason level. You must be hung for that. Just for that alone.
So the night that the Expositor was destroyed, they had to, like I said, they deliberated for 3 days in the city council about what to do with this and what legal loophole they could use to legally destroy this and still have a defense if they are called to a higher legal body to answer for their crimes, right? So they wiggled out this basically they manufactured an interpretation of a public nuisance article. And in the Nauvoo charter, as was the case in a lot of city charters, they had public nuisance lines, which meant that the constable could be called in to remove public nuisances. Most of the times those were like pigs running in the streets, or things that were like actual nuisances. Sometimes those were actually used on brothels, oddly enough. So the city council declared that the Nauvoo Expositor was a public nuisance, and Joe sent an order as mayor of Nauvoo to Marshal John P. Green to destroy the printing press and to pie the type, which means to scatter it on the street and burn everything. So that night he issued the order at 8 p.m. and John P. Green returned a half hour later with a writ saying, "Your will be done, Savior," and it was done. But obviously, the people knew this was going to happen. The laws knew that this was going to happen. It was on Law, like William Law, one of his properties. The printing press was in a building that William Law owned, and that was private property. He knew that they were going to break into his property, rip the printing press out, and take it out into the street and burn it. Everybody knew that this was going to happen. And this turned into a huge riot. The city of Nauvoo for that night was a riot. It was like I'm not going to draw analogies. It was a brawl. It was a big street brawl between the polygamists and the anti-polygamists. And part of it was that they had to break into that building to rip out the printing press. There were other allegations that they also rifled through some of the drawers that were in the office looking for other material and stole it from William Law. They were never proven true because obviously when all of this came up in court, the Nauvoo Municipal Court, Joseph Smith did nothing wrong. The city council did nothing wrong. Nobody did anything wrong. It was completely legal to burn this free press. And that's when the governor decided it was time to step in.
Ooh. And now who's the governor at this time again?
Thomas Ford, Governor Thomas Ford.
And he was the guy who, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, was pro, but was behind the scenes saying, no, I'm not supporting these guys. He up front acted like he was cool with them, but really he wasn't.
Ford is hard to nail down, really.
Okay.
So Ford was elected because the Mormons did the vote shifting.
Okay.
Joe promised his votes to Ford's opponent if Ford's opponent would represent him in court after the guys arrested him in Dixon, Illinois, and then he had those guys arrested, right, that whole fiasco. Yeah. But then Joe said that my brother had a revelation that we should vote for Thomas Ford, the Democrats, instead, and Ford was elected because he got that Mormon voting bloc that way. So he couldn't do anything to be really, openly antagonistic to the Mormons, because then he would be selling those votes in the next election cycle.
Weren't women sent to him too? Weren't there women to try and smooth this guy over too?
That was Thomas Carlin. So that was his predecessor.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm just trying to piece.
And that was with another one of Joe's arrests. So yeah, hey, it happens. We get all these things mixed up. I get it.
Yeah. You need a program to keep up with all the sideshows.
What were you saying, Dave? I interrupted you. I apologize.
Oh, no, it's all right. But it just occurs to me, we are just skimming the iceberg. There's so much we're leaving out. So yeah, there's.
So the governor, can we get into the governor getting involved, or potentially give a sneak peek of what's like? They know there's a problem, man. And it's probably not just him. There's probably a lot more than just the governor himself that knows something's got to change.
And it shows you how the gravity of this situation. Like, he's a guy who depends on Mormon votes, and yet what they've done just now is so bad that he can't ignore it, that he has to, turn on his own, bite the hand that feeds him, if you will.
And Ford, and remember, back in early 1842, right? So we're in May and June of 1844 right now. Back in 1842, the state of Missouri published all of their documents from the Missouri Mormon War.
Yeah.
And Thomas Ford, I cannot think anything other than the fact that he must have read those documents and seen what the Mormons had done in Missouri. And he saw where Lilburn Boggs had botched the handling of the Missouri Mormon War. And he was determined not to repeat the mistake. Because, hey, it might get him shot by Porter Rockwell in the middle of the night in his study, right? Yeah. So Thomas Ford was walking on eggshells with a lot of these issues. And he knew the public sentiment of the Missourians against the Mormons, and that same sentiment was brought with the Mormons into Illinois. the Illinoisans were, very receptive and very kind and helping to the Mormons when they were religious refugees. But when they realized how bad of neighbors the Mormons are,
Bingo.
the same reasons that the Missourians hated the Mormons started coming back up with the Illinoisans.
Yeah.
And that's from the political machinations. That's from Joseph Smith just holding way too much power. That's from the counterfeit money. That's from the municipal court throwing out any charges of thievery or robbery or anything. It's because of the river rats, the people who would just trundle up and down the Mississippi River and just steal stuff from people that would, conveniently be consecrated to the church. There are so many things that the Illinoisans just don't like the Mormons with, and Governor Ford recognizes that he is on the precipice of a repeat of the Missouri Mormon War, and if he doesn't handle the situation hands-on, boots on the ground, personally, then he is going to meet a similar fate as Lilburn Boggs did.
Yeah.
So the Nauvoo Expositor is burned, and immediately tons of affidavits are filed by the Laws, the Fosters, and the Higbees, right? Because it's their printing press. They are the publishers of the Nauvoo Expositor. But also Joseph's boys, a bunch of them write their own affidavits and talk about how this was a public nuisance, how this was all libelous, this is all slanderous, and that we had a reason to destroy this thing as a public nuisance. So these two groups of people are sending tons of information all back straight to Governor Ford, and he's in his office in Springfield like, what the hell is going on in Nauvoo? Shit, this is not good.
Yeah.
And he when he learns that the printing press is destroyed, he's like, I'm getting there. I gotta get there, and I got to keep a lid on this. It's going to boil over. It's going to explode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And he wasn't wrong. He was not wrong.
He was not wrong. Absolutely. So yeah. And it's interesting too, because like a number of the parties that are sent to meet with Governor Ford, they get there and they find out that he is on his way to Nauvoo to handle the situation, and they're like, oh crap. So they like try and track him down and chase him down to give him and meet with him, give him their documents and meet with him on the road, and they're not successful in doing so. Which, because the anti-Mormons, the anti-polygamy, the anti-Joseph group of people are successful in meeting with Governor Ford more than the Mormons were, the Mormons feel like that Governor Ford is getting a slanted version of the story. That he's acting too rashly, that the Mormons are not in the wrong, but there's just that they want to tell him their side of the story, and then he'll understand that nothing that was done was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh.
So Governor Ford is headed to Nauvoo.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
What's gonna happen, man? Oh man. So let me ask you this then. And let's teeter around this right here. He's heading to Nauvoo by himself?
No,
absolutely not. No, he actually sends an order, or he sends a request to the federal government asking for 10,000 soldiers from the nearby states, and Congress was like, "Ha, go get Ben. Screw you, man. Take a hike," which they maybe should have done. I'm not sure how that would have worked out. But then he also sends out orders to the various militia commanders in the areas and tells them to gather at Carthage. Carthage is the county seat of Hancock County. Nauvoo is in Hancock County. So Governor Ford is going to run the entire affair from Carthage, Illinois. That's where he is going to set up his base camp, where he's going to bring in all of the militias from the nearby towns and nearby counties. And that he is, if war happens, he is going to wage war on Nauvoo from Carthage, which is 18 miles away or whatever, just right directly down the Mississippi. So he is well aware. He's traveling with a posse. He is traveling with a lot of people with him. He knows that he's royalty, but also that if he doesn't play it right, if he doesn't walk this path right, his life is in danger.
He's like Game of Thrones level royalty. It's like, yes. Yeah. And you can see why he wanted to have 10,000 soldiers with him when he went to there. It's like,
absolutely. Yeah. Well, and he had read all the reports from Thomas Sharp in the Warsaw Signal, the guy who saw the parade and was like, whoa, not good, not good. Mormons bad. And that guy founded the anti-Mormon party, right? Like Thomas Ford had probably read every edition of the Warsaw Signal, which had talked about all of the things that are going on, which had, had in sometimes overemphasized, I don't think embellished is the right word, but had overemphasized certain aspects of criminality in Nauvoo, published exposés from defectors who went to Warsaw after they defected from Nauvoo. He knew the Mormon situation extremely well. And it's interesting, too, to read his memoir, right? Because he wrote a book titled History of Illinois and published it in 1852, which is, it's 8 years or 6 years after all of this is really going on and all of the dust had settled after the Mormons had been kicked out of the state of Illinois. But it's really interesting to read his reconstruction of events from his contemporary notes, because the dude had his head on straight in the situation. He was not playing partisan ball. He was smart. He knew the law. He knew where the law had been infringed. He knew what the situation was, and he knew how dangerous this revolutionary was. He was a damn smart guy.
Bam. Okay, give me some visuals here, Bryce. I want to see a map. You just mentioned Carthage. We want to get Nauvoo and Carthage on the picture. We have a man who knows his shit, and he is about to come in, and he's facing Satan himself, but he's better than Satan, at least mentally speaking. This guy knows he's coming to battle something big.
That's right. And this is Nauvoo. This is the Mississippi River. Here's the peninsula of Nauvoo here. That was so great for manufacturing if the Mormons had just been there at the right time, right? So here we have Springfield, right? And this is about a 3 to 4 day journey on horseback right here, right? And up here is Chicago. So Springfield is where the governor is departing from, and he is headed to Carthage, which I said down the Mississippi. It's actually Warsaw that's down the Mississippi. Here we have Carthage right here, right? So here's Nauvoo, here's Carthage, and Warsaw is right. Where's Warsaw? Warsaw. It's right on. No, that's Quincy.
But Carthage is just east of Nauvoo.
Just southeast, right? So here's Nauvoo, here's Carthage. There's a main highway that connected these these two towns. These were a well-traveled roadway. It's all it's all county roads now, but these towns are not that far apart, right? This is the county seat, and then Warsaw it's like right around here somewhere. Anyway, Warsaw, found it. There's right. So here's the triangle, right? Warsaw, Carthage, Nauvoo. Anti-Mormon hotbeds right here, Warsaw and Carthage, and then Nauvoo is the kingdom, the Mormon kingdom. And, as iterated many times before, this whole surrounding area is filled with Mormon settlements. Mostly non-Mormon settlements, but lots of little tiny pockets where Mormons are.
Need I remind people that Utah hasn't really come on the picture yet?
Not at all.
There's a reason why Nauvoo is a hot spot right now, because it's all happening there, but it doesn't end there. I don't think it ends here, right?
If it did, then I wouldn't be here, right? Like I wouldn't be a person.
Sure. That's a good point. So I want to cliffhang on this situation that's coming, and it's a storm. It's a no joke. Yeah. This is not the Missouri Mormon War. This is not a skirmish that got real out of hand with some people. This is bigger.
And this has the potential of being all those things. I was just going to say, we are talking.
What's Joseph Smith talking about right now? Do we have any evidence of his context of what he's saying in this time period?
One of the biggest mistakes that was made in all of this, earlier I said that Joseph Smith has handlers, right? Brigham Young and William Phelps and Heber Kimball. These guys are kind of his public handlers who translate this radical revolutionary, his thoughts and ideas and machinations into actual reasonable and actionable things to do, right? Brigham Young was the ledger guy. He could take any ledger and make all the red lines black. He was brilliant as a businessman.
Hmm.
And he also had some ability to mitigate Joseph Smith's radicalism. Well, this is an election year. Joe was running for president. He had sent almost all of the leadership all across the nation to go meet with people and to electioneer and to go knock on doors and talk about how great of a candidate Joseph Smith is and to have these meetings. So the leadership in Nauvoo, when the Nauvoo Expositor is published, is running on a skeleton crew, which means that it's much easier to be swayed to the whims and will of Joseph Smith alone, who has demonstrated himself to be a very irrational person, especially when he's being personally attacked like this. So all of those forces that could hopefully keep a lid on Joseph Smith and keep the situation in control, they're just gone. They're just absent. They're not there. The Mad King has created the throne unto himself, and he is the sole ruler of it right now. And that causes all sorts of dangerous situations because it makes it harder for his will to be transferred through the leadership to the rest of the people. It makes it very much harder for him to control the people around him. It makes his life a lot harder. And the moment when these guys are all gone, the greatest expose that has ever been published about Joseph Smith is published in the form of a newspaper that promises to be a weekly periodical. These guys are out in Boston and DC and New York City and North Carolina. Like, these guys are all over the country. It's going to take them weeks to get back to Nauvoo to be able to rankle this in. So Joseph Smith's irrationality and just crazed mania at this time is completely unbridled. And that obviously just makes him a rabid caged dog at this point.
Dave, tell me something, Dave. We've got a few, like 2-3 minutes here, and I'm closing this out. We're hanging on a thread, man.
I wanted to read you from the spring of 1844. There was a guy named King Follett who was a Mormon.
Oh, yeah.
And Joseph gave a sermon at his funeral. And this is the first time he publicly announced things like, that there's more than one God, that the eternal progression and all these things that have been up to now, a complete secret to anybody except himself and a few in his Mormons. And it says, when he was finished with the sermon, he paused and in a moment of self-searching said with a kind of wonder, "You don't know me. You never knew my heart. No man knows my history. I cannot tell it. I will never undertake it. I don't blame anyone for not believing my history. If I had not experienced what I have, I would not have believed it myself. Could not have believed it myself." Yeah, from Von Brody's book. Yeah,
that line spawned one of the best biographies of Joseph Smith ever.
So, one of the best biographies of anybody I've ever read. Ever.
True, yeah. I mean, Von Brody's an amazing writer. Yeah.
I mean, just watching this series alone will give you enough reason to say, how the hell, really, seriously, like, how did this guy who, honestly, like, the funny part is, like, when he's getting duped by people who are creating fabricated archaeological finds,
right?
And he's like known to say some hick statement. All right, now look here. Here's the deal. This guy is,
Aramaic is Hebrew and Egyptian.
Yeah, he's like a redneck, man, and he's a redneck that has this much power.
Yeah,
I mean, dangerous. What? Not being educated enough, but being good at tricking people, knowing how to people skills and manipulative. It's just amazing what that can do.
Yeah, and it's amazing too that it's not just Joseph, it's not just Brigham. There's a whole rogues gallery of people that constantly came in and out of the circle. John Z. Bennett, Samson Elvard, all these guys. I mean, just ridiculous. And William Law. The irony about William Law is that he would have been he was Joe's second in command. He was totally loyal, totally full of integrity. He would have been, the guy you want in your corner. But instead, he would go to the John C. Bennett, the guys who were just as big weasels as he was. And it just amazes me how these guys just flocked, to like flies on shit. Yeah.
I can't help but think about what the risk reward system of their brains looks like, right? Because most of us are like, hey, I'm hungry, then I eat a food, and then my brain puts little chemicals in my body that makes me happy. And like that's the risk reward system that we have built into us to be able to survive. What kind of how was their brain tuned such that they were getting the rewards out of these very high risk but apparently very high reward situations?
Bingo.
Because that is a vicious cycle. And it can only spiral upwards in the chaos too. Like there's no ratcheting this down. There's no mitigating force. It's always like, how big can I make the army? How many wives can I get? How big can I make my following? How big can I make my city? How many people are going to, write bad periodicals about me? How many books and revelations am I going to write? Like it's always a ratcheting up. It's always an amping up. It's always a positive feedback loop that only leads to more destruction. It's crazy to see.
It is. And it's kind of fascinating because it's like every authoritarian movement you can think of goes by the same playbook. It's like, if it's crazy, we're going to double down on the crazy and let it ride.
Yep.
And at any moment, you're losing heretics, you're losing followers, they're suffering, but it just goes on long enough that if you can just get through this hoop and this hoop and this hoop, it's fascinating to watch it. It's pathological. And
it is.
What
Very
a magnificent bastard. What a magnificent bastard.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. You're going to want to see this next episode. I mean, it just gets more and more climatic, and I cannot wait to see what's going to happen. Once again, the end is soon, and I just don't know what's going to happen, but I am interested in seeing. I know it's only going to get worse in many respects. So with that being said, get ready for the next video. Go check out their patrons. Make sure you go support both of these guys and what they're doing to bring this content to you. And maybe you got somebody who works for HBO or some Netflix or something. Holler at your boy, okay? We've got Bryce, the host of Naked Mormonism podcast. You have the Complete Heretics Guide to Western Religion, Book 1, The Mormons, and that is by David Fitzgerald. Make sure you guys go show us some love. And never forget, we are MythVision.
I have hundreds of videos on the Patreon. Become a patron and get early access to everything I ever launch. Join the Twitter. I've got a Discord chat room. You guys can help grow the community. One-time PayPal or Cash App if you want to help us out with a donation. And join our Facebook groups, man. Let's make this thing happen.